Hey, yo, what's good, YouTube? Welcome back, because we're back at it again with another video. Right. So right now we're looking at another one of Serious History's videos, disturbing jobs for kids in history. It's surprising that kids had jobs in past history, but then let's lock in.
Whipping boys. We'll start with the horrible and end with the horrific. Number 5. Whipping boys. Imagine you're in the classroom in Renaissance England, and your hard-ass teacher just caught your buddy cheating on his Latin exam. The teacher walks over to him, breaks out his baton, but instead of pummeling your friend, he starts beating you instead. Well, this was your life if you were a whipping boy. A whipping boy was a young servant or companion who would be assigned to a prince or a young nobleman to get beaten in his place if the high-status boy ever misbehaved or underperformed academically. Royal tutors would virtually
So wait, this was a job, bro. You would apply for this shit. There's no way you would apply for this shit, bro. Imagine you're an essay going ending in your CV to applying for you to apply to being what's this to get your ass whipped. This is crazy, bro. If a black person were to be doing this shit, you'd be having some serious PTSD.
always hold lower status than nobility, and since it was considered inappropriate to physically strike a prince or a future king, the whipping boy solved the problem of a teacher getting mad at a student and having nobody to take out their frustrations on. Usually, the whipping boys would be selected from lower status families that lived near the noble household. Their lower status made the people beating them feel better about the situation. And since in those days it was widely believed that beatings were necessary and even essential to the moral and disciplinary upbringing of young men, they found themselves getting bruised and bloodied on a pretty regular basis. Now, receiving a beating that was intended for someone else sucks enough, but it gets worse. Obviously, back in those days, punishments were a little more severe, so some of these tutors really went to town. In addition to beatings with sticks and whippings with palms, one common punishment technique included making the whipping boy kneel on dry corn cobs. We can only assume that this was because Legos weren't invented yet. Now,
Nah. Hey, in those times, shit was crazy, bro. There's no way. There's no way, bro.
if you can believe it, there actually were some upsides to being a whipping boy.
Enlighten
The
me.
entire basis for this punishment relied on the fact that the prince or nobility actually cared about their whipping boy. If the prince didn't care about the boy being beat down in his place,
Dude, that's just going. That's
cared
going
about their
over the
whipping
top,
boy.
bro.
If the prince didn't care about the boy being
Over
beat down
the
in his
top,
place,
bro.
he probably wouldn't change his behavior, and it would be a pretty ineffective form of punishment. So for
So you'd have to hope, you'd have to pray that the person, the prince you are probably like, yeah, the prince you are taking a whipping for is a good prince. Otherwise, bro. Otherwise, boy, you fucked.
this reason, the whipping
You fucked.
changes behavior, and it would be a pretty ineffective form of punishment. So for this reason,
I
the
mean,
whipping
like getting a whipping for someone else is fucked regardless, but still, dog.
boy was usually a close friend of the prince. They would study together, train together, and hang out with each other on a pretty regular basis. They were basically the prince's wingman. To go from a peasant to being buddies with the prince, getting the same upbringing and education, even learning the same skills, that's a pretty nice upgrade. As long as you didn't piss the prince off, or as long as the prince wasn't an idiot. Number 4. Castrato. If you were a young boy blessed with a golden singing voice in 16th century Europe, you may have been better off just keeping your mouth shut, because if word got out, you could find yourself being made into a castrato. A castrato was a male opera singer who was surgically castrated before puberty to prevent the production of testosterone and ensure
What? No, bro. Nah, bro. They would chop your sack off just so that you, bro, bro, bro. I'm fighting you, dog. Don't do that. They chop your sack off just so you can keep your voice.
who was surgically castrated before puberty to prevent the production of testosterone and ensure that their voice stayed at a high pitch forever. The first castrati were introduced in Europe in the 16th century.
So like, I don't know. off topic, dog. By chopping them off, okay, let me just, cause I don't know where I heard this, bro. I won't lie, I don't know where I heard this. They say the further they chop, the deeper the voice. Is that true? I just want to know. I just want to know, bro. I just want to know. I ain't gonna lie.
when women were banned from choirs and the stage. In order to fill the vocal gaps left by the high-pitched women, choirs developed castrati. That probably wasn't a fun call to get. I lost my job! To who? A kid with no ball. Now, as fun as castration sounds, it was probably even worse than you think. Methods varied, but usually a dose of opium was administered to the boy to knock him into a coma. In other cases, pressure would be put on an artery in the neck so the patient would pass out. Once under, the
Why did you put it like that, bro? Just say they strangle the fuck out of you before chopping your nuts off, dog. This is crazy. They
pressure would be put on an artery in the neck so the patient would pass out. Once under, the fun would begin. In some cases, the boys got off with just the medieval equivalent of a vasectomy. In others, the testicles themselves were completely removed. But probably the worst method of all would be when the testicles were twisted until they atrophied. If that doesn't make you clench up, I don't know what will. This procedure would usually...
Yo. It doesn't matter who you are, bro. I do not wish for nobody to experience that type of pain. Dude, that is crazy. Are they at least sedated? I mean, strangled at least.
If that doesn't make you clench up, I don't know what will. This procedure would usually be done on boys between the ages of 8 and 10 years old, and recovery from the surgery would usually take about 2 weeks. Then, the castrato was ready to take the stage. If they survived the procedure, that is. Sometimes the boys...
You're not guaranteed to survive either. Dude, no way. No way, bro. It doesn't matter, regardless of like whatever job that requires me to get rid of my sack. That is not happening, bro. That is not happening. I don't give a fuck what job it is, bro. Nah.
Otto was ready to take the stage. If they survived the procedure, that is. Sometimes the boys were accidentally given a deadly dose of opium, or the sustained pressure on their arteries would result in their heart stopping. It's also important.
So if it's not them giving you a lethal dose of like whatever they were using to sedate you, it's them forgetting that they were strangling you in the first place, and then you die. Nah, bro. Nah, I'm keeping my sack, dog.
Or the sustained pressure on their arteries would result in their heart stopping. It's also important to mention that none of this was legal, so these procedures took place in shady back rooms by surgeons who had doctorates made out of construction paper. And when asked why their voices never changed, a castrato would have to make up a fake story. While survival wasn't a guarantee, what a castrato received made the prospect worth it. Castrati often had successful and illustrious opera careers, usually after becoming full-grown men. You know, as full-grown as you can be without any testosterone. The lack of testosterone messed with their bone development and actually contributed to their lung power and their overall vocal ability. Castrati remained prevalent well into the 18th century, but then their popularity began to decline due to both tastes in opera and social attitudes in general. All I know is it must have sucked to be the last castrato who lost his boys for nothing. Number 3. Barber's apprentice. Barber's apprentice? Doesn't seem so bad. Sweeping up hair, learning to give people some sick fades. Well, a barber in the Middle Ages was a much different job than what we think of today, and the kids who were barbers' apprentices had to do some pretty nasty stuff. In the olden days, specifically the Middle Ages in Europe, barbers, or more accurately barber surgeons, not only cut your hair, but were called upon to do all matters of medical procedures. According to one source, barbers were selected because they possessed razors and were dexterous. Seems a little light on the qualifications.
So that's it. Getting a job back then was much easier than getting a job right now, bro. That is crazy. Yo, that's crazy. All you had to do was come in a lab coat and you would define as a scientist. Hey, bro, that's crazy. Unlike now. Hey.
If you ask, and were dexterous. Seems a little light on the qualifications if you ask me. Barber surgeons would not only cut hair, but perform surgery, bloodletting, amputate limbs, and pull teeth. In fact, the red striping on the iconic barber's pole originally represented the blood from bloodletting or surgeries performed by barbers. Back in those days, being a surgeon didn't carry the same weight it does today. In the Middle Ages, barber surgeons were just everyday workers, and surgery was seen to be on the same professional plane as butchery, and the duties of these young barber apprentices encompassed more than you'd imagine. Because of the wide range of services that barber surgeons offered, the apprentice had a ton of tasks to assist with. They would help with medical procedures, starting out small with things like bloodletting and dressing wounds, but eventually working their way up to more complex things, like advanced surgeries and amputations. You have to remember, in some cases, these apprentices were
I mean, like, besides the other ones we just had, like, watched, this one doesn't seem all that bad. But still, mentally, it's destroying whoever is the apprentice. But then it doesn't seem as bad.
as young as 6 or 7 years old.
And getting your ass beat for no reason at all, just because this motherfucker decided to pull off of some weird stunt, and then now you have to get your ass beat. Nah, I prefer this job.
You have to remember working their way up to more complex things, like advanced surgeries and amputations. You have to remember, in some cases, these apprentices were as young as 6 or 7 years old. Imagine being 7 years old and being told you had
6. Bro, you are barely out the womb, dog. You barely out the womb, they're already giving you a job. Some of us have to wait like 20 years, bro.
Imagine being 7 years old and being told you had to saw off a man's arm after he was gored by a boar while out on a hunt. Your master hands you the saw and just watches. Remember what I told you, Cooper. Just ignore the screams. You then have to wipe off the bloody instruments and mop all the carnage off the floor, making sure things are spick and span for when the next patient comes in. A 300
Niggas like, keep sawing, dog. Don't mind the screams. That is crazy, bro. A 6-year-old.
100-pound behemoth with boils all over his butt. I don't know about you, but I'd probably look into blacksmithing instead. Number 2, toshers. The toilet is kind of a magical invention. You do your business, pull a lever, and like magic, water washes away the shame without a trace. But with great power comes great responsibility. And if something important or valuable like your keys or your limited edition hologram Charizard card somehow ends up flushed down the toilet, you may never see it again. Unless you lived in Victorian England, that is. Back in that time period, there was a job called a tosher. A tosher was someone who went down into the vast London sewer systems looking for valuable items. Flush toilets were the new rage, and lots of things ended up getting flushed down those magical holes and into the city's complex sewer systems, and toshing became a way for low-income individuals to make ends meet. And of course, people made their kids do it. The employment of children as toshers is pretty self-explanatory. Tiny kids could more easily navigate the tunnels of the sewers, and their small, nimble frames allowed them to access areas that fully grown adults couldn't get to. Of course, this wasn't exactly a super sought-after position, so the children employed as toshers usually came from extremely poor families, and in many cases, their parents sold them into the labor. But the job was so much worse than you could ever imagine. Toshers would wade through the sewage-filled tunnels, looking for jewelry, coins, or anything else that could be sold for profit. In addition to being downright disgusting, toshing was also one of the most dangerous jobs in Victorian England. Sewer tunnels flooded often, and many toshers would drown while on the job. The brickwork of the tunnels themselves was quite fragile and could cave in when even brushed up against, and the labyrinth of tunnels was easy to get lost in. A slow, painful death by starvation in the London sewers is the stuff of nightmares. Add to that the constant exposure to human waste and diseases like typhoid and cholera, and you have one of the worst jobs imaginable for anyone, let alone
Yeah,
a small
I'd stick
child.
to the-
Oh yeah, and the
the
rats. Diseases aside, the rats in London sewers would bite and scratch the Toshers as they tried to rifle through the mud, water, and human waste. An adult against 10 rats? Not a big deal. A 7-year-old against 10 rats? Those are like 50-50 odds. As hard as this is to believe, there were some benefits to being a Tosher. The job averaged about 6 shillings a day, which for working-class Victorians was towards the top of the ladder. Eventually, as waste disposal and management improved, toshing became a less sustainable line of work, and the profession died down. Number 1. Matchstick Dipper. Matchstick dippers are exactly what they sound like. They were people employed in matchmaking factories, whose
Okay,
primary
seems
job
easy
was to
enough.
dip the small wooden matchstick into a vat of chemicals in order to coat the match with a flammable tip. The chemicals used varied, but the mix almost always included white phosphorus and sulfur. Now, you probably know this, but matchsticks are tiny sticks of wood with a tiny bulb of chemicals on a tip. And you know what was great for carefully handling tiny sticks of wood? Tiny hands, of course. Specifically, the tiny hands of young girls.
Hello.
Now, the conditions in matchmaking factories were hazardous for anyone, regardless of their position. Factories were overcrowded with poor lighting and ventilation. Dust and chemical vapors were constantly swirling around the building, and the equipment used in matchmaking consisted of machines for cutting, shaping, and packaging wood. So accidents involving crushed limbs, ripped out hair, and amputated limbs were common. And also, it's a scorching hot factory that makes matches. The risk of fires and explosions was severe, but the matchstick dippers had it much worse than anyone else. The chemicals used to coat the matches, particularly the white phosphorus, were all highly toxic, and the matchstick dippers were constantly coming into contact with it, mixing it, touching it, and breathing in the fumes. This chemical exposure led to respiratory illnesses, skin irritations, and worst of all, a condition called phossy jaw. Phossy jaw.
Wait. No way, bro. No way. What chemical is this? The fact that it targets the entire jaw.
Is a condition in which and worst of all, a condition called phossy jaw.
It just pops
Phossy
off.
jaw is a condition in which the vapor from white phosphorus eats away at a person's jawbone, causing the bone to rot inside of the person's mouth. These girls' bones literally rotted inside of their skulls. Phossy jaw often started as a toothache, with
What?
pain that was persistent and progressive, expanding to encompass the entire mouth, before the infected jaw, usually the lower jaw, would fall right off the face. Yeah, like a zombie. And get this, infected bones would usually glow a light green color in the dark. Similar to the textile
way,
factories,
bro.
as more and more people learned what really went on inside
Like, yo, yo, imagining just biting into like a burger before I could just land that bite, my jaw falls off. What am I doing next? That is crazy, bro.
matchmaking factories, people understandably grew outraged and called for reform. And this public outrage, along with advances in matchmaking technology, led to the decreased use of children to make matchsticks.
Bro, the fact that you niggas were using children for such jobs in the first place is crazy, bro. That's just crazy. That's stupid crazy, I ain't gonna lie. So yeah, that was the whole video. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. Yeah, I know it's some of them are kind of bland for now because I've been away for a week. So again, I have to start all over with this whole shit. We have to get used to being in camera and all that. But like I said, I'm just gonna be consistent with this. Obviously, I'm gonna make it a little bit interesting at some point, and I don't know if I should open what's this, a gaming channel, because obviously I do play games on the side, but then I'm using my laptop for all that. You feel me? So it doesn't really have like high end games or anything like that. It's just gonna be like those online 1v1 like Brawlhalla, if you know Brawlhalla. I'll be playing that. But as to when be focused on that as well, I'm not sure. But then yeah, with that said, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.